قل بفضل الله وبرحمته فبذلك فليفرحوا هو خير مما يجمعون.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد خاتم النبيين وإمام المرسلين وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. فقد قال جل وعلا في كتابه المبين: من يطع الرسول فقد أطاع الله ومن تولى فما أرسلناك عليهم حفيظا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I hope you're all well and in good spirits. The topic is, I'm not going to stick to the topic basically.
Stick to the time, the topic's
the problem with the topic is it's a bit difficult and it's a very technical topic as well. And to really get a grasp of it, we have to go through maybe one or two scenarios. And I think it takes away from the spirit of a Mawlid and spirit of getting together to know about the Prophet ﷺ, coming to know about the Prophet ﷺ, and it will become a legal discussion. But I can talk about some aspects of that legal system, and two specifically which I want to address. The problem that I feel we have now in understanding the life of the Prophet ﷺ is a separation between the legal side of Islam and the spiritual side of Islam. And we've kind of separated these two and made them mutually exclusive. That if you tick all the boxes, that means that you've kind of fulfilled your obligation. But what that results in is largely cognitive dissonance, where a person will tick all the boxes but they won't feel any better. They'll still feel spiritually low. And they're thinking to themselves, I prayed all my salats today, I fast in Ramadan, I generally am a good person. But none of that practice essentially is affecting how I feel about the Prophet ﷺ and about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or it's not giving me that kind of boost that I need to just survive in this manic environment that we live in. And I think that's because we've misunderstood or we've misinterpreted the message of the Prophet ﷺ. It's kind of a bold claim to make, but I'll try to substantiate it as best as I can. So where I want to begin actually is with just before the Prophet ﷺ makes hijrah. I know that's been covered, but it's important that I kind of mention it at least. The prayer, the salah, was made obligatory in Makkah al-Mukarramah. The night journey, which I don't know who's covering the night journey.
It's done last year.
Oh, there you go.
You did it.
No, I wasn't here last year. I've been here for 2 years. But anyway, it's going to be covered. I did look at the itinerary. I think it's covered by Shaykh Daniel. I think is covering it. Anyway, the night journey takes place possibly 1 year before hijrah. Some say some months before the hijrah. Some say 1 year. And some say it took place after the death of Sayyidah Khadijatul Kubra radiyallahu anha. In the night journey, we learn that the Prophet ﷺ is commanded by God to pray. Now, it's not that the Prophet ﷺ didn't pray before that. Ibn Hajar documents that the ulama generally in agreement that the companions were praying. And there's a kind of quasi-obligation where the night prayer, some say the afternoon prayer, form of prayer that period, they felt that it was obligatory. But the night journey kind of now introduces the 5 obligatory prayers. The Prophet ﷺ then migrates to Madina al-Munawwara, and the first thing or the first part of the legal system that's established is the constitution of Mecca, of Medina, and we're going to talk about that maybe towards the end. But what I want to really focus on is at the point of the prayer being established and the Prophet ﷺ then moving to Madina al-Munawwara, what defines a believer? How do we know somebody's a Muslim? And that's very, very important, the identity of a believer. And it goes hand in hand with the legal system. What we have now is a kind of a legal definition of a believer. Somebody who reads a shahada, somebody who maybe overtly he looks like a Muslim. I don't know what that means, but I assume It's for
Primary school girl wearing hijab, I think. Is that what it means?
that's child abuse. But anyway, no, I'm joking, man. Shoot me.
You're going to get opposite. You're going to get a recording of this, man.
You get it? Now, you put me off. Yeah. Anyway, what's the definition? So generally, people will see a sister in a hijab, and like, oh, that's a Muslim, or a man with a beard. That's in fashion, or maybe a topi or a kurta. And our definitions are very superficial, or they're very external at least. So when we see a person, a believer is based on kind of the way that they look. But that doesn't make much sense, because the Arabs looked the same. They all had beards and they dressed exactly the same. If you walked into Madinah al-Munawwara, it would be very difficult to differentiate between a Muslim and a non-Muslim based on their clothing. The way that women dressed, in fact, was also to a large degree cultural. The idea of modesty, there was a cultural idea. So what defined a believer, you see? Is it something legal? Okay. Now, if we move on to people becoming Muslim in Iran and Iraq, or the Persian area, one thing that's important is when Islam spreads across Persia, they don't have much knowledge of Islam. They know that the idea of God, they understand it, the idea of the Prophet ﷺ, but do they know legal verses? Like, do they know verses about halal meat? And immediately they don't, obviously, they just become Muslim. So they learn law slowly. And Madinah Munawwara is the kind of the basic case for that, where laws are being revealed one after the other. So it's not somebody's knowledge of Quran that makes them Muslim. If you look right now, probably 99% of the Muslim Ummah know less than 5% of the Quran. How many actually know what it means? Last 10 surahs, even that stretch if they know the translation. So if knowing the Quran doesn't define you as a Muslim, then what defines you as a Muslim? If your knowledge doesn't define you necessarily as a Muslim, yes, the basic things we all understand. But the more you know doesn't indicate that the more Muslim you are. Now, I believe that it's the idea of the congregation prayer. Joseph Van Essa, Orientalist theologian, he argues that what defined Muslims was the congregation prayer, was people coming together in the masjid and praying together. And that's what made them feel, gave them the feeling of belief, and also defined them as believers. And it's incredibly important, because that's what took place in Madinah al-Munawwara. The first edict of the Prophet ﷺ was to build a masjid. That's the first legal ruling, or the first command given. And as I mentioned the verse at the beginning, he who obeys the messenger has obeyed God, and he who forsakes the messenger, Allah says to the Prophet ﷺ, you have not been sent to protect them. They do not have your guardianship or your protection. So once the masjid was built, the whole idea was that the identity of a Muslim was known through the masjid, the people who came together. Now that's not restricted to the masjid. You have to look at the idea. The idea is that Muslims are known or defined by those people who congregate for a common interest, which is the belief in God, or a common belief, or a common certainty. And that has simply been lost amongst us, because it also is the command of the prayer, which is the most common command amongst Muslims. And it's the most important legal ruling that we have in our religion, i.e. the prayer, to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's where we find the spirit of Islam, the legal spirit, or the spirit that should have been there, intertwined with the action. If you look at people now, Sherry Turkle has a very interesting book called Alone Together, where she talks about how our lives are so separate even though we're so together on social media. Everybody is, you have 2,000 friends on social media, but people feel more lonely. When we took that central aspect of congregating away, the believers, that first legal ruling essentially, the prayer in Mecca and then transferred to Medina, when we took that away, we lost purpose, because we are required by God to come together for a common good. The Prophet ﷺ in Madinah al-Munawwara set up the first constitution, and Dr. Hamidullah argues that it's the first constitution in human history. The constitution of this country, or the Magna Carta, was established 600 years after the Madinan constitution. 600 years after. And which is alarming. And nobody really talks about the constitution in Medina. The constitution in Medina, Dr. Hamidullah dedicated an entire study to it. It's very, very important we know what happened. When the Prophet ﷺ enters Madina al-Munawwara, there are a few legal rulings even in that. He says, Afshu Salam, which is a legal ruling, by the way, because the command of the Prophet ﷺ is binding upon the Muslims. At least it's something that should be recommended for the Muslims. He said, spread peace, Afshu Salam. The second thing he said was, At'imu ta'am, feed people, feed people. And the third, وَصَلُّوا بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّاسُ النِّيَامِ, and pray in the night when everybody's asleep. تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ بِالسَّلَامِ, you will enter Jannah with no problem. That's what it means. Salam here means you won't have any problems on the Day of Judgment. Then he realized, alayhi salatu wasalam, that the Jews at that time were really pretty much at war with each other politically. One tribe over the other, and they had kind of loosely agreed one leader at that time. But when the Prophet ﷺ entered Madina al-Munawwara, they realized, and everybody realized, his kind of magnetic pull and how the people loved him. And eventually they realized also that everybody would pull towards him and he will become the supreme leader of Madina al-Munawwara. And they finally agreed to this constitution, and it had certain regulations within it. They differ on when these laws came into place. Some say the first part of the constitution takes place before Badr, and the second takes place after Badr. Some of the constitution is related to defense, working obligations and rights, and equality. Now, in terms of equality, the constitution clearly states that all people, be they Ahlul Kitab, people of the book, Muslims or polytheists, they are all equally treated, which is incredible. From kind of the first point of the Prophet ﷺ entering the city, he shows how equality is very important amongst people. The second was working rights. People from Mecca had traveled to Medina, migrated, and they needed work. So the Prophet ﷺ said that they should be aided in that work should be made available for them as well to feed their families. And the next point is the point of peace, not just observing peace but defending the territory. That whoever attacks Madina al-Munawwara, everybody's obligated to fight them, to defend their land. And that nobody's to have ties with the Quraysh, which is really overlooked, because when we look at Sirah accounts that Bani Nadir, they actually made pacts with the Quraysh, and they broke the treaty, this constitution, they went against it. That's why the wars took place later. What's incredible about the constitution was that we often have an idea that I'm a good person, I feel I'm a good person anyway, and can't I just think of God in my heart? Do I really need to pray? Do I really need to fast? Can't I just love God? The manner that we've been created in, we require system and law, even for our general kind of behavior in the day. Some of the ulama state that the prayer was given at different times to break up the day for time management, to manage your time as well, not just to make you better people in the way that or make us better people in the way that we manage time. Now, doesn't that go against God obligating prayer upon us? But remember, God doesn't need our prayer. God has no need for our prayer. God is the only constant. He is the infinite. He doesn't change. So why would God require our prayer? So the prayer could only benefit us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states that those who pray protects them from the idea of fahsha and munkar, kind of immoral acts and indecency. That could be just by busying yourself in something like prayer, such that you don't have time to do that. It could be. The legal system in Islam often is there for pragmatism, and we've made it the end goal, and that's a huge problem. In Jannah there is no law, in that you don't pray, you don't fast. There are not all these restrictions in Al-Jannah. So the law therefore cannot be a reward necessarily. It's just there for reasons of pragmatism, to show people control, self-control, and to make people function in society. The law is a means to an end, and that end is worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or submitting to a higher power. And what I want to kind of look at or explore just a little bit. Doc, how long do I have? I don't need that long. Yeah, just a few more minutes. The message that I kind of want you to, or want to deliver, is we need to stop nitpicking when it comes to law. And Imam Ghazali mentions something very, very important about this. The Prophet ﷺ introduced law, or law was given to him for a reason. It was a means to an end. That end is not being achieved anymore. The law has become the means and the end in and of itself, which is a huge problem. Imam al-Ghazali in his opening section of Kitab al-Tahara, the book of purification, states that if you look at Medina in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, you find that there were a lot of animals. So therefore you will have a lot of animal dung and impurity. But yet the companions, they were not that fussy about wudu, for instance. What do we mean? They would make wudu, but they wouldn't be obsessive over it. They would just make it and pray. They would pray in their sandals, which is a sunnah to pray in your shoes, for instance, before you shoot me down. The Hanafis agreed on it, don't worry about it. Mullah Ali Qari has a book saying it's sunnah. No, not in the masjid, don't wear your shoes.
Please don't bring your shoes into the masjid.
Yeah, for God's sake, I don't mean that. If you stop somewhere. But people generally think, oh, will they have najas on them? You know, will there be impurity on them? Well, think about it, where they were walking. And if you go to kind of countries, or if you live in villages in Pakistan, you find the same thing there. But yet they would often pray in their sandals. And he said because their idea of ablution was a means to an end. They just wanted to get to the salah. And the salah was a means to an end. They wanted tranquility in their prayer, mindfulness, so they could think about God alone. He said all of this was a means to an end. The means were they would ask one of the companions for a particular question. Once they received the answer, they would just get on with it. What we've done now is, if you look in our syllabi, we'll have 15 books on fiqh. At the end of it, your prayer's no better than it was at the beginning. And the problem there is a kind of a dichotomy. We've divided law into Islam into law, and then what a Muslim should be, a spiritual person. But we have to use the law to achieve that to a degree. So we've ticked all the boxes, but we're no better. And then we've lost mercy in the law as well. The Prophet ﷺ was the most merciful of God's creation, but yet when it comes to law now, people have no mercy for, especially the muftis. It's like they'll ask a question, Mufti Sahib, what's the fatwa on this? And Mufti Sahib say, haram. And the same, but I heard that a lot of scholars said it's okay and my situation's really bad. And the Mufti Sahib looks at you in disgust. You immoral, vile. There's no fatwa for you. Either you leave it or you're going to hell, and then you kind of walk out. But remember the story of that man who came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, and he had adab as well, he said, "O Messenger of God," he was fasting and he broke his fast. He just broke it, and he said, so he broke it because he had he broke his fast when he went home. And there's children here, Alex. I'll use loose language, or actually specific language. He said, "Ya Rasulullah, she looked like the moonlight." So then it was understood what he was talking about. He said, "What's the recompense? What do I have to do?" He said, "You have to fast 60 days in a row." And the Prophet ﷺ said, and he said, "Ya Rasulullah, I could barely do one fast. 60 days. That isn't happening." So the Prophet ﷺ said, "Okay, you have to feed this many poor people." He said, I've got no money." And he said, "What do you have?" He said, "Let me go home and have a look." So he comes back and he has like a small bag of dates. He said, "Feed them the dates then." And he said, "But I'm hungry as well." and I'm poorer than them. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, "Okay, take some for yourself and give the rest to them." And the point there was that the Prophet ﷺ was constantly looking to make his situation easier. That's the law. That's the prophetic paradigm. That's the law that the Prophet ﷺ was given, to make it easy for people, especially when they're in these situations. we have not only made it difficult for people, but we've made it difficult for ourselves. And when we kind of make it difficult for ourselves, then we begin to have all these waswasas about God, and we've made Islam so... Islam is a very, very simple religion. We believe in God, we believe in the Prophet ﷺ, the angels, the books, the Day of Judgment, and law has been systematized by the ulama to make it easy for us, or to facilitate our relationship with God and His Messenger. And the legal part and the adl of the Prophet ﷺ, if you read the Sirah, if you really want to know law, read the Sirah, and you'll find the character of the Prophet ﷺ. Our legal system is the character of the Prophet ﷺ. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Indeed, in the Masjid of Allah is the best example for you. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر لي ولكم وأتوب إليه.